Welcome back to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, where pop culture is used to learn about history. While secondary sources, which are about a subject, are fine, primary sources, which are from a subject, are even better. Analyzing pop culture as primary sources can reveal just as much about an era in history as the thickest textbook or the longest documentary. Road Rash II was developed by Electronic Arts in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, the 16-bit video game platform that had itself been created to compete with the home video game giant Nintendo. Both game and system were a product of commercial outlets trying to get the attention of the teenage demographic that Nintendo and other brands were falling behind with. Brian stopped by to talk with me during my recent visit to Loaded Question Brewery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to speak about how games like Road Rash II and many other titles for the Genesis helped elevate the status of electronic arts among video gamers. I'm here with Brian at Loaded Question Brewery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I brought a whole bunch of Christmas stuff because I was hoping to fill the time on my podcast between now and Christmas with Christmas-themed topics, but I brought Road Rash II, and that's what caught your eye, isn't it?
Oh, man, I love that game. I remember my Sega Genesis that I got for Christmas back in 19-something.
So we could turn this into a Christmas episode, actually.
I think
because,
we should.
Genesis... What a name for a console. It's pretty deep, actually. Genesis. Nintendo already came out, and that's what it was competing against, yet they named themselves after the first book of the Bible, as a way to video game. It was like, did you have Altered Beast? Did you have that version of it that came with Altered Beast?
I don't remember what game it came with, honestly. I think I was playing... I wanted Double Dragon 2, and I wanted Rampage. So I think my parents got me the one that didn't have the game with it.
Okay,
and So they gave me the Genesis, and I remember I was excited, but when I opened up all my presents, I was disappointed, right? Because I didn't get a game. And then my dad's like, why don't you check your stocking? And I checked my stocking, and I'm like, oh, Dad.
I was going to say, because these fit nicely into stockings, and
absolutely.
It started the era of deceptive gift giving because you were like, it's not big, it's not good, but something small can be fantastic too. Like Game Boys are small, Game Gears. Genesis was created basically because the video game wars were on, right? Nintendo had Mario, it had all those colorful, bright games, but Genesis was going for that slightly older audience, right? They wanted teenagers to get into video gaming, and the best way to do that was to introduce games that would get them like, oh, this is tough, this is bad, right? I like playing this, it's dangerous.
Absolutely.
And Road Rash, tell us a little bit about what Road Rash is all about, that series.
Geez, Road Rash, I think, is probably the most perfect game ever invented at the time because, you mentioned Mario Brothers, and I was a big Mario Kart fan, and we had the Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo, and we had some of those different racing games with Nintendo and 8-bit games growing up. Now, the cool thing about Road Rash, it was a motorcycle game, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to kick people and hit people and grab weapons, and it wasn't just about racing and being the fastest person out there. It was doing anything you had to do to win, right?
If I remember correctly, they all had names too, like all your enemies that you were fighting against, like Spike, and I forget some of the other ones, but and some were outstanding. Like as soon as the race started, they were gone.
They were.
And you didn't see them out, and you also had cops to contend with. You'd be driving on your motorcycle, and all of a sudden, you'd see lights in the back. So. The question that I chose for us to talk about is, what was the maker's role or status in society? And just looking at this box, what is the company name that made Road Rash 2?
It says Electronic Arts.
Electronic Arts, which this is their old logo, isn't it? The weird one with the square, the circle, and the triangle, or the cone. I don't know if their status had quite made it just yet, as far as being the the go-to for excellent games, because the shape of this game and the time period it came out, 92, 91, that's right around the time of John Madden football.
Absolutely. I was just going to go there with you. Yep.
Do you remember this little like weird yellow plastic thing on the John Madden cartridge?
Yeah, I do. You know what that's for? That's for memory.
Is it? So because that's what set it above the Nintendo, right? Is it?
Right, exactly. So like when you used to play the Nintendo games, the 8-bit games, you would be able to create your players and trade players, but they'd forget, right?
Right.
They wouldn't be able to save all that. Now they had this for it. This was before, if you remember, they didn't have special packs like some of the games that came afterwards that would have the memory sticks. So that was actually a little battery and a memory that was in there.
Okay, so that clears things up for me. I just thought it was an aesthetic thing. I thought they were like,
that's why you don't have that on every game.
Just to set it aside from, because Electronic Arts was trying new stuff with game making, weren't they? They were trying to make, like, the sports games were all them, because the Nintendo sports games, they just didn't have enough power, memory, or anything to make them real. You could only have like 8-on-8 football, or
they just went for replay value, right?
Right. It just wasn't the same. And then when John Madden got brought into making video games, he said, no, football has to be 11 on 11. You can't, it's not football if it's not 11 on 11. So they're like, all right, well, we got to find some way to do that, but also keep costs reasonable enough that people aren't spending $200, to buy a video game. So it seems like that technology carried over, because Road Rash was a pretty great graphics game, wasn't it?
It really was. It was, for its time, it was great with graphics. The replay was awesome. And I'm surprised that nobody's made another one since, or if they have, I haven't noticed.
I think they tried for other consoles, but think about the other games that were coming out late 90s. I mean, after Mortal Kombat, it was all over. Like violent video games, crazy blood and guts and gore. If I remember correctly, the first couple Road Rashes didn't have that much. It was like guys falling off their motorcycle, and that was it. But I want to say the later, like maybe 3, started to introduce like blood, because that was selling. That was like getting people into the arcades. That was getting them to buy the games at from the Mortal Kombats and stuff like that. And as time went on, I'm pretty sure they made one of these. I know they made one for Sega CD. Do you remember Sega CD?
Yeah, was that the Dreamcast? Is that what that was?
It was pre-Dreamcast. It was back in the time when Sega thought it was wise to keep adding more hardware to the Genesis.
Laserdisc?
So the Sega CD came next to it, like you would attach to the Genesis, and then after that they came out with the Sega 32 or something like that, which attached. It was like by the end of it, your Genesis looked the size of like your couch. It was huge, and that was like the end of the 90s. They're like, people don't want gigantic entertainment systems. They want sleek. They want PlayStation. They want Xbox, which looks like a VCR size. And when they started doing Road Rash for those kind of consoles, it just got swept up in the minutia of Grand Theft Auto, which has to be inspired by this game, or all those other ultra violent games. And this isn't going to shock anybody, but for its time, 91, 92, what is the status of EA Sports? What does that tell you about the time period of the early 90s?
What, as far as EA Sports goes?
Yeah, just or just EA Electronic Arts. I want to say they were out of Montreal. I think they were a East Coast company. I don't think they were California like so many of the other.
Yeah, I don't really remember. The only thing I remember about EA Sports is just basically their slogan. Every time you put in a Madden or a RBI baseball or MVP baseball,
yes,
which was another one, the one with Manny Ramirez on it was a wonderful. They said EA Sports. It's in the game.
Yeah.
And then you knew the game was loading. You're ready to go. Let me wipe off the sweat off my hands and the pizza. Take a sip of that Mountain Dew. Make sure the door is locked so mom doesn't come in. It's time to rock and roll, right?
The white screen with the nice clean.
Oh, absolutely.
I have a copy up there of one of the NBA, EA Sports NBA games from around the same time period.
Oh, wow.
And it's funny because this Road Rash predates that just by a hair. Before they got known for the sports games, they were doing stuff like this. And I feel like they're, that's why it's not so highlighted on here, because their status hadn't arrived yet, right? They were still kind of working out what their wheelhouse was and what the audience wanted. And when they hit that nice white packaging with the red and blue, totally different lettering than this, that's when they hooked you. And would you say their status is still pretty high when it comes to games?
I think so. If you get a sports game and it's EA Sports, it's a good game. But geez, back in the '90s and the '80s, I mean, I wouldn't have even thought to think about it unless it was like Konami, right? And you know the code for that. The old up, down, left, right. BA. Am I playing with somebody? Select start for the Contra code, right?
And get it.
Gallagher. Geez, other than that, Activision, I remember that.
Yeah. Capcom had Street Fighter. And I mean, there's a couple others where it's
Mega Man, right? That's Capcom. Right?
Yep, Mega Man, Capcom, Street Fighter 2.
Right.
All the Street Fighters, Capcom. It was almost like there's this guy on YouTube called the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Oh, really?
Have you ever followed him?
No.
He's been around forever. He's hilarious because it's a character this guy takes on, but he has all the old video games, and he goes after the crappy ones. And there's a particular company, the name escapes me right now, that he points out is the mark of a garbage game.
Okay.
Because they had no business making video games. They were a toy company that also made video games on the side.
Okay.
So that's why they always had some fatal flaw that made it unplayable, like Fester's Quest, or
I remember
like those kind of these endless games that never go anywhere. And it's the one that has like the little rainbow. The symbol. It's like J.
I'd have to see it again.
Yeah,
but I do remember something along those lines.
Like EA was, I think, one of those companies that was breaking away from that, because I mean, this is the age of high competition for video games, right?
Yes.
Like we said at the beginning, like Genesis was a great Christmas present, especially for older kids, because it was like, all right, you're getting tired of The Legend of Zelda. That's
right.
Old news. You want something with an edge. You want something kind of cool, faster, louder, more in your face. Genesis, right? That's the teenager game. And this game is it's like MTV and all the movies of the time period, just kind of like put into video game. It's fast, it's violent, it's, you can win the race, but you really need to punch out a guy to do it.
Right,
remember when you get the chain and you're whipping a chain around at people?
I remember the chain. That's probably the first weapon I was thinking about.
This game ruined me for a solid decade. Every time I was on the highway and I saw a guy on one of the motorcycles, because for people who never played it, it wasn't like Harley Davidsons that they were driving around. It was like street bikes, right? It was like like Kawasaki's and stuff.
Up and down hills. I mean, it was really, it was kind of like Rad Racer, right?
Yeah.
It was just going straight forward. We're going left and right.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of twists and turns.
Down, but you could go off the road and then recover. It wasn't like Rad Racer that you get stuck in like a hay bale or something.
Right.
No, you kept going. If you got launched, you had to jam on those buttons.
You had to run.
Get back on that bike, right? Jam on those buttons and go after whoever just knocked you off. And there was always enough computer assistance that you could always catch up to whoever.
Right.
And you were never out of that race.
The lame guy. I think they had some guy with lead butt or something like that, was always the last place. And if you lost to him, you were no good at the game. But this one, it was it was. I mean, for a long time, my brother and I who played these games together, we would always rent them. We didn't actually own a lot of games. We would on the weekend get to rent some, and so we were in that much more pressure to try to win the game and buy more bikes, and because we're we only have 2 days to do this, so we better get on it.
And that's another topic. I mean, just remembering renting, I just missed that. And when we were talking about this earlier, I remember going to the local video store and just renting. I was able to pay whatever it was, $10 for an hour, and just go house on whatever video games they had, and just keep going and keep going and keep going.
It was definitely an era that you can see a beginning and end to, because I would say probably when the last Blockbuster closed, that was the end of the era. And actually when I was a kid, right across the street from where we're sitting right now, I think there's a pizza place there now. Right around the corner from Hannaford was the video store that we used to go to.
Okay.
And they, it was the classic video store with the little, you take the tag off the rack and you bring it to the counter, and they'd give you the actual tape and stuff like that. And places like that is where we'd always get our games too, because they go hand in hand. I remember having to return these games, and my mom, generation, obviously, hopefully older than us, said the sweetest thing one time. She's like, "Do you have to rewind your games?" And we're like, that. "No, Mom." Like the tapes, you have to rewind those, but the games, they just start from the beginning.
You just have to blow on the games.
Right.
It's a whole different situation. You got to blow on it.
We were not experts in that. So many games. Nintendo was worse than Sega when it came to that. But yeah, you'd put it in. Come on, it's not working. You get the scrambled screen.
Right.
Blow on it.
But at least with Nintendo, you had that option to stick that other game on top of the first game.
Right.
And get a connection that way.
And see if it would work out. I was always worried that, so before I blew on the game, I made sure that my mouth was as dry as possible, because I was really afraid I was going to spit on it, and then it would electrocute me.
Right? Because it's just like a little microchip underneath it, right?
Yeah.
This is a sizable one, but talking about the 8-bit Nintendo, this is 16-bit. This Road Rage.
These things have kind of had a renaissance in recent years because of all those retro games that they're coming back out with.
Okay.
And I mean, more recently they just have it. You don't need a cartridge, but it looks like a little Nintendo and has 400 games on there.
Oh, right, I have that, but the core's not long enough.
Right, exactly, and you can't just use the old. But for a while, probably about 10 years ago, they were making these things called twins, and it was like a Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo all in one, and the cartridges would work for that, and it was totally marketed towards our age group, because it was like, your old machine probably is ruined now, or you got rid of it, but it brought these games right back again, because suddenly pawn shops and a lot of video game stores and other media stores were selling the old games again. And I remember I would go to flea markets and yard sales
markets,
and look for them again.
I remember doing that. Yeah, the flea markets. But then $10 games. Right, I bought up all the Nintendo games when Genesis and Super Nintendo came up. I remember just going with $20 and we used to stack them. I had one probably 4 feet tall, just one on top of another, just taller than me at the time. I think I had all the games at one point.
It was such a cool way to, especially the sports games, to interact with the game. Road Rash, not as much, but because thank God it's not real. But the Madden, and I remember it was another parent story. I remember playing the original Madden, and my dad was watching. He was like, "That looks like real TV," and of course, for the time it was really great. But looking back on the original Madden now, it's like, oh my God. That looks real to you, Dad? Because I could show you.
Absolutely.
I have a game. I play Madden on my phone now, and that looks real. That's solid.
It's funny. EA Sports. We were talking about that and just the effect they had on our childhood. I have an Xbox One. I know it's an older system, but I just bought 2 new games.
Yeah.
And they were both EA Sport games. I bought Madden, and if you've ever played Madden, it plays the same way. It has a replay that all the buttons on the left go to the left receiver, the ones on the right go to the right receiver. And I bought Tiger Woods. The new Tiger Woods came out. That's been gone for, quite some time now, right?
Yeah.
But that's an EA Sports game, and I have the new Tiger Woods. But it's different now, because now I'm used to watching TV and playing games on my phone. So now when I put the games on my Xbox, I want to play with my phone, and I can't. It's just a different way of playing games these days, right?
It is a weird. It's a much different relationship. It's it's gone full circle almost, because the portability aspect of games was I think the first hurdle that we had to get past, because for a long time the arcade was the only place to play it, but then you could bring it home, but it was kind of portable. You could unplug it with ease and go somewhere else, in that movie The Wizard.
Fred Savage at his best.
Is it Christian Slater's character like brings his Nintendo everywhere he goes. And
the best part about that was the first time we saw Super Mario Brothers 3. Do you remember
that's right.
that?
They used it as a marketing campaign.
And he figured out how to stand on top of a white box for 8 seconds, and he was able to sneak behind the background to get the whistle to the warp zone, and all the 80s kids went wild when that happened.
That drove me nuts in that movie because I'm like, the girl is like telling how to she's yelling from the crowd I'm like, how did you know the game just came out a minute ago? How would you know how to do anything?
Well, I mean, he was a wizard after all.
That's right. He figured it out because he's brilliant.
Did you see that glove they were playing with at one time? I never got to play with that.
I think I remember.
Must be nice. That's all I have to say.
A friend of mine's house, he had it, but he gave up on it pretty quick because it was like it didn't work. But the kid in that movie was like, he said something. He's like, I never leave home without it. And that was actually Tobey Maguire's first movie.
No kidding.
He's in the background.
I'm gonna have to revisit this.
He's one of the kid with the glove. He's one of his like lackeys, and he's like sitting in the background. There's Spider-Man, just like, and it's like, and then like, man, you just brought up a whole like Mandela effect thing too. That for the longest time I thought that was Ben Savage that played the wizard, like Fred Savage's little brother. It's totally not. I watched the movie last year.
Right.
That's not him. I thought it was the Boy Meets World kid. It's not.
No, that's his older brother.
Yeah, like that's Fred in the movie.
That's Fred,
but the little kid in the movie is not Ben Savage at all. It's some totally other kid. I thought it was him. I could remember curly hair, but it didn't have curly hair. And then Super Mario Brothers 3, last thought before we wrap things up with Road Rash, is I've heard speculation that that's actually a play put on by the Mario characters about the first two games.
Okay.
Because it starts out with curtains.
All right, with the curtains.
Come up, and then all of the levels almost look like sets. That's why you can go behind.
Right. Okay. That
the
makes
blocks.
Sense.
Like they're like actually like a painted set of like the original game.
That was one of my favorite games because it wasn't just left to right. You could go right to left. And then you could fly. You could get that raccoon tail, and you could fly and go above everything.
I want to say it was that game that put the challenge out there to the other video game developers, not just the Nintendo itself, but specifically that game, because that game came out, I think, 88, 89 or so. And then if you were already onto the sequel to Road Rash by 91, 92.
Okay.
There's an explosion 80s into the 90s of video games coming out from all directions, all different topics. It's a far cry from Mario. There's no raccoon tails in this.
It certainly is.
So Brian, thank you so much for coming back here and talking to me.
Talking about the old days.
About Road Rash 2.
Not long ago.
Awesome. We're just a little past halfway through Season 2 of the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to what you've heard so far. Short episodes like this one, which are products of my EPS podcast live exhibits, have been coming out on Tuesdays this season, while longer episodes, deeper dives into subjects, are posted on Thursdays. If you like what you hear, consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/EPS podcast. Follow the show on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. I look forward to you tuning in again to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.